Good morning, Karl. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Karl is the managing director at CPSU. CPSU, the Central Procurement and Supplies Unit at Mater Dei. A client that naturally we keep close to heart because it was one of our first clients when we set up in Malta. So naturally, it is a very important client for us. They are also doing a very important and job at the moment, um, considering the situation, obviously, the pandemic and the situation that we're in. On that note, I would like to, on behalf of Kaizen, thank Karl and his team for all the great work they're doing in managing this pandemic, specifically by supplying medical supplies to both patients and the staff to ensure to protect their safety, basically. Karl, on that note, the topic on everybody's lips, um, COVID-19 and its effects. Um, we know that in your industry specifically, there has been a surge in demand. And my question relates directly to this. With this surge in demand, with the effects of the pandemic, how has the efficiency within the operations at CPSU been affected?
Let me explain what happened during COVID. During COVID, obviously, we have been asked by central government to take over the protective wear, the person protective wear of all the country, not just of health. So we have met with all the ministries, we have identified the requirements, we have collaborated with the infection control unit and the policy department to determine the policy through which these units would be entitled for specific protective wear. Obviously, not all masks are the same, not all patients or clients require the same equipment. So first of all, we met together as a committee at OPM level, at the Office of Prime Minister level, to determine the requirements of each and every minister. After we took a snapshot, because obviously things were evolving, and we would at that point we didn't know exactly how it would have affected Malta, and up till now we still don't know because it's evolving, and it all depends on the severity of the impact. We have calculated some estimates, and those estimates we went out to try and source whatever product we required, bearing from gloves, gowns, aprons, coveralls, masks, goggles, whatever is required to protect the operator from getting infected. Apart from that, obviously, we had to keep the business running in terms of treatments, medical supplies, operations, and everything, although we had a dip in demand because obviously non-emergency surgical services were placed at a halt. So we only did the emergency ones, the elective, we placed them on hold. But that actually posed another problem, that we needed to contain the deliveries. Because obviously we had a motor in place that the supplies were coming in. So we had to actually balance out what supplies we needed to increase versus what other supplies we need to reduce their delivery. To that, we went out with a strategy, with a very strong strategy, that we placed various orders with various suppliers, knowing well too well that some of the suppliers would fail in delivery, because obviously we had no concrete guarantee that the supplies would be delivered. So with that in mind, we took a strategy that we placed a lot of orders with a lot of suppliers from various countries, because as you know as well, there were lockdowns in certain countries, so certain suppliers couldn't leave the country. Other countries actually stopped exporting because they wanted to protect their own country from having these supplies. So for us, it was like a war zone, to give a comparison. We managed to secure various orders from various suppliers. We took note of quality, because obviously at this moment in time, a lot of suppliers wanted to sell whatever products they had in hand, but not all products were suitable. In fact, even at EU level, certain supplies had to be discarded because they were found not to be adequate for use. And the last thing we want is, apart from spending the money, is getting protective wear that doesn't protect you. So that was the essential part for us. We actually had coordinated with various ministries for support, being we coordinated with the foreign affairs, because we had the ambassadors of Malta all over the globe helping us in finding alternative sources of supplies, because the traditional sources of supplies were limited and people were not going into risks that they couldn't supply something, so they get into penalties and everything. So the normal supply chain was totally disrupted. We found alternative sources, we found direct sources. We had our peace of mind because we weren't buying fish in the sea, but we had our own ambassadors who were actually checking the quality and relaying the specifications to us to check whether they were suitable or not. We also had support from Transport Malta, from Air Malta, from other departments that actually supported us in getting these supplies to Malta, because the first difficulty was to find a reliable source. The other difficulty was getting them to Malta. When you have all those lockdowns, a lot of airplanes were grounded. We used to get a lot of supplies through passenger aircrafts, cargoes, so we had to rent even cargo aircrafts. But we actually managed, because obviously having support from the Maltese airline company who know the business more than we do and supporting us, that created a situation where we had peace of mind that supplies would come in. And in fact, supplies started coming in as early as 2 weeks from orders. So we started the ordering at the end of February. By mid-March, we were being flooded by supplies coming in. We were checking the quality. We were actually having problems in storing all this volume because it's an enormous volume. And we, together with the education department, knowing that the schools were closed, we used their halls as storage areas, because we didn't have any space of this magnitude to stock all these supplies. With the support from Parliament and the finance ministry, we got, apart from getting the budget, because obviously you need a large amount of money to tackle all these orders at once. We also got authority to process orders directly instead of going through the bureaucratic chain of getting the necessary approvals. So with that, I think within span of weeks, we actually confirmed orders to the tune of over 100 million euros, which for Malta, it's a very big magnitude of supplies. In fact, 100 million euros, it's what we spend normally for the supply of medical treatments in Malta. So that's as large as the volumes we get. Obviously, it wasn't just related to the protective wear. We bought ventilators, we bought oxygen concentrator, we bought air purifiers, HEPA filters. So we increased the volume of the hospital. The hospital was increased by 4 times the bed capacity we had in critical care areas. We opened 4 to 5 ITUs. So it was an expansion progress as well as we went along. Apart from the fact that we had to cater for the healthcare workers, because if a healthcare worker has any doubt that he got infected by a patient, we had to provide accommodation for that person, for that staff. We also made agreements with the private sector to expand our capacity of bed spaces, because obviously Malta, knowing the magnitude we have, we had established that we would have approximately 20,000 cases, but thank God they weren't there, so we didn't get that impact. But obviously we had to prepare for that. So all in all, I think that with the collaboration with all ministries, clinicians, and politicians, we managed to do the impossible possible within a couple of weeks. By end of March, we were prepared in taking over, I would say over 1,000 patients at once, and over 50 to 100 cases of critical care, which was enormous because we are normally geared only for 20 patients in ITU. So we expanded to that volume. We also had situations where we had supplies that were promised, obviously, but not received. So to that, we were very cautious in the payment terms, because in the payment terms, we had a situation that suppliers not delivering and ending up taking the money but not supplying. So to that, we took advice from the central bank and also from the local commercial banks that we didn't accept prepayment. We accepted advance payment upon delivery. So we had guarantees that upon the delivery, we would release the payment, but we didn't release payments in advance. And obviously when looking around European countries, there were a lot of countries that to secure stocks, they had issued prepayment, which they lost, or they need to recoup through legal means, which is a headache because obviously companies were forming up with no background, non-existence before. So if they vanish, you can't grip to anything. I don't know whether I replied to the first question, Jeffrey.
Yes, I think that answered not just this question, but question number 2, 3, and 4 that I had planned. But that's good. That's good because we know very well sort of all the effective measures that are being put in place, obviously by your department. You mentioned a lot of difficulties, Karl, a lot of difficulties that you're facing, and this is during a time maybe when a lot of the movement out there, people's ability out and commute as usual is restricted to a certain extent by government regulations. But now we're living in a different scenario. These restrictions have been eased. So my question here is, with the ease of restrictions, how have operations at CPSU now been affected?
It actually affected our operations in terms of supplies because the total supply chain was disrupted. Thank God we were pre-planning a stockpiling because of Brexit. So the government had stockpiled since Brexit came along, and a lot of products were being bought from the UK. So thank God for that. We were well prepared, well in advance of the pandemic, because we were preparing for Brexit, not for the pandemic. Obviously, it's the same thing because you need a stockpile. I would say that the COVID thing didn't affect us much. It more affected us in terms of storage facilities and in terms of rescheduling the orders to come in, not to lump a lot of stock into the warehouse. As you know, because you have experience in the warehouse has very limited space. So we tried to make use of external storage facilities. We have set up agreements with the private sector for cold storage and thermal control storage. So we try to place our stockpile inside these external stores, not to lump it all on the main stores of government. However, in terms of supplies, it did affect us, but we didn't see an increase in stockouts to make it quite clear, because obviously we had the buffer we had ourselves created because of Brexit.
Karl, very often we hear that in every crisis there's an opportunity. This pandemic, no doubt about it, has caused many difficulties in our operations. It has caused a crisis. But from a CPSU perspective, would you say there has been a growth factor? Would you say that, although it has caused strain on operations, but because of this same pandemic, now CPSU's operations have improved? Can you say that?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, we saw an opportunity of having staff working from home. A lot of our staff are women, so we gave them the opportunity of working from home. They're still working from home as we speak, although we have retracted the major pandemic alert. But it worked quite well. It works more efficiently because at the end of the day, they take time to come to work, and they disrupt each other by speaking and obviously socializing. So working from home was an effective measure for us. Another effective measure was the actual purchasing tools. We established a more database approach, so we are more knowledgeable of what stock comes in and comes out of our source, so we can replenish as we need, not for stockpiling now. So we are being more lenient in the stockholding we have. Obviously, we saw other opportunities, like we made very good contacts with other suppliers now. We're not just limiting to local suppliers, and there are good, reliable suppliers all over the world. We have made contact with other ministries and other governments with a strong tie now that we can collaborate together, to the tune that we're collaborating even on the COVID vaccine. We are into a joint procurement for COVID vaccine. So we saw how we can live together. Before it was me and them. Now it's more of an us mentality. So we're more into things together, because obviously having a pandemic, it makes you think of what are the important factors. And the important factors is that you need to survive. That's the first primary thing. To survive, we have learned that we need to work and collaborate together. We cannot work in isolation. And quite pleasantly, we have noted that other ministries can support. And other ministries are willing to support, as other countries are. Because even when we have problems of supplies from other countries, they contact us, we help them out. They support us as well. So it's more a collaborative approach rather than every country working on its own. And this was important for us because obviously a pandemic is something of a large magnitude, and doing it alone wouldn't have worked.
So on that note, if we do have a second wave, do you think that operations at CPSU are now geared up to manage with the possibility of a second wave?
Your question is very difficult to answer because nobody knows in any country the magnitude by which they will be hit. And that's why it's called a pandemic, because it spears out of proportion before you know it. What we are doing at the moment, once we are now in shallow grounds that the pandemic is not so hard in Malta, we have actually consolidated what we started during pandemic. So we had temporary provisions, we're making them permanent. We had negotiated procedure for supplies, we're doing tenders and contracts now. We're doing stockpiling, we're doing storage areas, external storage areas. So we're consolidating what we had started during the pandemic in a more solidified manner rather than on the fly as we had to do during the pandemic. So to answer to that question is, we are getting prepared more than we were for the first wave, for sure. Obviously, it all depends how much it will hit us. And we're trying to flatten the wave, because at the end of the day, that is what will work. And our limiting factor will not be the ventilators or the protective wear or the space. It will always be human resources. Human resources are a problem across the globe. We're also working in getting additional human resources, nurses, doctors, whatever we require. But obviously, they are part of our limiting factor. They are most vulnerable, because if we get a cross contamination, we will lose resources, and that we cannot go away from, because they're obviously dealing with contaminated patients, and whatever provisions you take, there will still be certain situations where we will have infected healthcare workers. But obviously, we will do our best in being more prepared than we were for the first wave. The first wave wasn't so hard on us, but still we were more prepared than what we got. And now we're consolidating those to have a permanent solution, not just having a situation where we start opening wards, we start getting patients out and things like that. Tied to that, we have recommenced with the procedure. So the operations we had lagged behind, now we're trying to recoup them. So for us, it's no holiday at the moment because we don't have COVID. Quite honestly and personally speaking, I'm in a worse situation today than I was in COVID. Because in COVID, we were all hands-on deck dealing with one problem. Now that we got back to the normal business we did usually, and we need to recoup what we left behind, it is more of a problem for us to actually get through this period. But obviously, we're trying to manage.
Well, thank you very much, Karl. Thank you for being with us. I know that this is a difficult time for everybody, difficult time especially for the medical sector. But through this interview, and obviously through what we hear in the media and what we know is all the efforts that you have put in place, the medical sector in general. So at least during this difficult time, it's quite reassuring to hear that, you know, the medical sector has taken all these measures to ensure to contain the situation as much as possible.
My only word of advice is one thing, which really hurts me about all this. We have had many people clapping at us. We have many recognitions. We have many situations. But when you actually look around you, people are afraid of us. They want us to tackle the problem, but as long as it's from their door outwards, we have no problem. We have to understand and accept the situation that we in the healthcare sector, we are, not just me, but even all the people around, are risking their lives for all the country. They need respect, not just by clapping from 2 kilometers away. They need respect because they are risking their lives for others, which might not be even their family. So COVID has given us a very important lesson. We have to live and appreciate each other. And we need to keep on that because that is the only thing that will pass through COVID or through any pandemic that comes along. We cannot just see things from the television and not be actively involved. We need to be actively involved and we need to support each other. So that's my
Yes, agreed.
my word of
I
advice.
think you make a very good. I mean, in one of your previous comments, you made a very good point. This is not just a problem relating to the medical sector, not. But it's our problem. It's everybody's problem, and we have to sort of be in it together. You know, it affects us all, and I think it's not just Malta. It's everybody together has to put in their effort to ensure that, you know, we get through this. So using this interview also, yes, I appeal that the society that society in general does its part so that we can contain and get out of the situation ASAP. Thank you, Karl. As always, appreciated. On behalf of Kaizen, one last time, I'd like to thank you for all that you have done and you are doing, you and your team. Thank you.